some of the community projects. Along the way, I suppose I'll mention some topics that people may be familiar with, but because everybody mightn't be at the same level of familiarity, I'll keep it pretty simple. To start, this is what the structure of LAWPRO looks like, the Local Authority Waters Programme. There is a communities team, of which I am part, Community Water Officer, and there's the Catchment Assessment team. We're based all over the country with a primary office in Clonmel. We're part of what's called a shared partnership, so we're housed in inverted commas by the local authorities. The role of the community water officers is really to engage with community groups and to encourage them to get involved with protecting and enhancing their local water bodies. The Catchment Assessment team are out on the ground collecting additional data to what already exists to really try and pinpoint what is impacting the water quality of a specific water body in a given area. I'll just move on here. The EU Water Framework Directive obviously informs all of this work, and as Fiona mentioned, LAWPRO as an organisation is relatively new, and LAWPRO was established in 2016 because Ireland was not meeting its requirements under the EU Water Framework Directive. Water Framework Directive is a legal framework to protect and restore clean water across Europe by 2027. The parameter by which the Water Framework Directive aims to achieve its objective is by achieving good ecological status in all waters. But unfortunately, the goal of achieving that by 2027 won't be achieved, so that will have to be extended beyond that. On the right-hand side, you'll see the small table that shows the status of water bodies. Each water body is assigned a status from bad to high, and the EPA assigns this status. And you might be aware that recently in the new year, the EPA came out with a new Water Quality in Ireland report, 2013 to 2018. This had a number of significant findings in relation to water quality. Among them were that the number of poor status river water bodies in Ireland has increased by a third, 110 water bodies since the first assessment in 2007-2009. So the current situation isn't a positive one. All the more need for people and agencies to work together in order to affect change regarding water quality. People might be familiar with this map. If you're not, it's catchments.ie. It's really valuable resource as a website. One of its many features is that it maps or shows the status of all water bodies in the country. This has recently been updated, that it shows the 2013-2018 updated EPA status for water bodies. But what I have here is the older 2010-2015. The reason for that is because I also wanted to show people what are called the priority areas for action, which are identified there, shown in the purple patches. And for some reason, the new Catchments website doesn't show these, and I think that's because they're currently there's a currently ongoing consultation for the new priority areas for action to put in place. But as you see, the map shows the status of all water bodies, but equally the priority areas for action are where the catchment science team of LAWPRO are based. So that's where they focus. These areas were chosen in the River Basin Management Plan for various reasons. They might have been because they were a good status water body and was at risk of not maintaining that status. So, so that was chosen. But there were various different criteria why these 190 priority areas were chosen. My own role, Community Water Officer, is not limited to those priority areas. We can work throughout our given area. This slide also mentions the main aim of our work is to protect the high and good status water bodies and to improve moderate, poor and bad status water bodies. This next slide is just the catchments overlaid on the previous map. So you can just see it's slightly transparent, so you can see the previous map with the priority areas for action. But the catchments, there's 46 in Ireland and then 500 and something sub-catchments. And the reason why it's important to show this is that the unique approach of LAWPRO as an organisation is the catchments-based approach. So that's not working traditionally as it was in the past, a local authority within its local authority boundaries, but crossing beyond them. So if you just see there some of the purple priority areas for action underneath that catchments layer, obviously cross through and beyond catchment boundaries. And this then fosters collaboration between local authorities, agencies and communities. Now, that obviously took a bit of getting used to when LAWPRO started in 2016, but it's been working really well over the last few years. So instead of people working in their own defined geographical area, people are looking beyond it and working together. So it's been a very positive aspect of LAWPRO as an organisation. I just want to show this point quickly. The River Basin Management Plan, some people might be more familiar with it than others. It's easily downloadable if people want to look at it in more detail as a PDF. These are the high-level points from it. So basically, if the Water Framework Directive, if everything starts from the Water Framework Directive, the River Basin Management Plan is really the structure of how the Water Framework Directive is being implemented in Ireland. We're currently in the second River Basin Management Plan, and next year, hopefully, myself and my other colleagues, community water officers, will be facilitating consultations. We don't know COVID-19 if it'll be virtual or if it'll be in real world, but consultations on the third River Basin Management Plan. The second River Basin Management Plan, as you see here in front of you, learned a lot from the first one, what not to do, what worked well, what didn't. So hopefully we'll have learned a lot from the second River Basin Management Plan. And the third runs up to 2027, as I mentioned, was the deadline for reaching good ecological status in all waters in Europe, which unfortunately won't be met. Onto my own role as a community water officer, I've highlighted a line there encapsulating the role that it supports community groups to engage with and protect the local water bodies. And I have a few points underneath, sort of highlighting the main jobs we do, but it really is only part of it. It's such an all-encompassing job, and it's multifaceted that it doesn't really do it justice. And sort of the broadness of the role and the flexibility within the role is equally what makes it so effective as a role. I'm in my position 9-10 months, and from the very first week, I could see engagement groups. And my previous role was community engagement and environmental education, but I could see and feel the uniqueness within the role that there isn't an end point as such in our remit to engage with the groups. So in a way, it's a positive and a negative. We could be doing as much work as we wanted, and groups will be demanding more of you all the time, but equally, it means that within that role, we can offer more and we're available to groups more. Undoubtedly, it can be difficult to maintain that level of support and contact with each group. I work with groups from Malahide, Swords, to City Centre, to Clondalkin. So that intense level of support and connection and communication is very hard to maintain. But as my line manager, Ray Spain, constantly reiterates, in LAWPRO and for the role of the community water officer, the ultimate aim is to have an exit strategy, which sounds strange, but the idea is to, in a best case scenario, bring a group to a level of self-sufficiency, which is really ambitious, especially if you think about how diverse and varying community groups can be. They're subject to the same issues as any organisation, in the sense that personnel or membership retention, quality of membership. I don't mean to be cruel in that sense, but to make a group from a small, nice, pleasant community group to a really effective group, what we've come to realise is that some of the boring stuff like governance is really what makes a group effective. So that's what we're really starting to look at, and supporting groups to to make their governance sustainable. Um, you know, in the sense that a lot of groups have that raw enthusiasm, which is really necessary and useful at the start, but in order to make them sustainable in the long term, the groups that are that bit more effective always have that core internal group that look after meetings, the funding, the accounts, and are looking at the long-term and short-term objectives. So that's what we as a group are looking more and more towards, supporting groups to become sustainable. So this is just an image we use, this graphic, because we try to get people to think and groups to think in terms of a catchment. Because then it makes them realize how interconnected we all are. And even if a group is motivated by a really noble cause related to their local water body, it can often still be very internal in their small little patch. Whereas if you're thinking catchments based, you know, you realize that someone upstream of you may have caused what is your relevant issue, or what you do in your catchment will affect someone downstream. And the idea of thinking in catchments sense is that, you know, we're all ultimately live in a catchment. For water, a catchment is simply defined as an area of land around a river, lake, or other body of water. What it shows is that we all interact in some way with water, either recreationally or in a domestic setting, even unbeknownst to ourselves. So we all have a role to play in looking after water as a resource. Obviously, these are an example of many of the pressures, urban pressures, agricultural pressures that we all play a role in. I just want to mention briefly a fund that we have. It's not massive, 220,000 nationally, but it's just another string to our bow. It's far from the focus of all our work, because, as I mentioned, our work can be so all-encompassing from the level of contact we have with a group and level of support we give. But it does help, there's no two ways about it, having that other aspect to be able to give a few quid in fairness to a group. It fosters a sort of a level of trust and enthusiasm that is helpful in our role. Because of COVID-19, the grants were only, I think it was 2 weeks ago that it was announced what people got. Usually it would be a bit before that. But it does help in our role as community water officer to have that other aspect. Yes, we talk to groups about how to access lots of different funding streams, but to have our own little pot is helpful. To give you an idea, recently these are the groups that I work with in Dublin that received funding from ourselves. So you see the array, the different types of A, the amounts, and B, the types of projects. So there's everything from educational projects to awareness projects that will have to be tweaked because of COVID-19, and some are about events. There's others doing citizen science there, which are small stream characterization score, which is getting into the water, and kick sampling, which is looking for the macroinvertebrates that are indicators of water quality. Others are getting consultants to do feasibility studies. So there's an array of projects there that ultimately are about engaging groups with their water body, and the end point is to try and affect water quality. That's is our remit. In a way, it makes it very simple for us, but is very helpful remit for us to have. I'll just mention also that LAWPRO, in partnership with Inland Fisheries Ireland and Waterways Ireland, have a special award on tidy towns. It's worth mentioning because the level to which this engages communities, tidy towns groups, you know, to have that special category. And you see here at the bottom, it's Friends of the Camac in Clondalkin, who were the regional overall winners last year in 2019. Unfortunately, Tidy Towns Awards won't be going ahead this year, but to have that special award really engages groups, and all these aspects that motivate a group to get involved in projects can help. So on that note, mentioning Friends of the Camac, with my last few slides, I just want to do a mini case study on Friends of the Camac. The reason why they're worth mentioning is because they're a prime example, really the epitome of a group that indicate that the close connection between LAWPRO as an organisation and Community Water Officer and the group. The group began as a result of a community meeting on the River Basin Management Plan done by my predecessor, Sinead Hurston, who was the Community Water Officer. So after that meeting, the group formed, and they were an offshoot of Clondalkin Tidy Towns. They were supported in every step of the way by Sinead Hurston and then subsequently with myself. So you can just track that interaction between LAWPRO as an organisation and the group. And they began by organising regular cleanups, which is what people often associate with tidy towns groups or rivers groups. But they progressed and they commissioned fisheries reports, biodiversity management reports on their stretch in Clondalkin, have begun reaching out to groups in other parts of the Camac, so they're thinking in a catchment scale. They've won awards, as I mentioned, Tidy Towns Awards. They have a really slick, informed newsletter. They have short-term and long-term objectives. So ultimately, as a group, they have progressed and have become established and are sustainable into the future, even at this point. If I go on, this is one of many tools that LAWPRO that we use to gauge the progress of a group, a continuum, and this is how we have gauged Friends of the Camac's progress from point 1 to point 4, which is phenomenal in 3 years. Now we have a stage 6 there, which is about a group becoming self-sustaining. You know, which is there ever really an end point for a group? But that is the aim, and the ambition there is that a group, the governance, and Friends of the Camac are an example of really good governance, that it will need minimal or no support from a community water officer, and then we can start to look at other groups. They would, at stage 6, they would be thinking in a catchment scale. They would be engaged in complex projects that are related to the River Basin Management Plan, and they're not dependent on 1 or 2 people. So that's the end point. And some people, when they think of the end point of a rivers-related group, would think of the Rivers Trusts, which is a UK model, but you see more and more of these groups appearing in Ireland. But that's not necessarily the case. It's less what you call this group. It can be a river partnership or whatever name you put on it. It's just that the group embodies that level of, or that those characteristics, that engagement with the local water body, and will have those structures in place. So the name of what you call that group when it reaches that point of sustainability is not the important point. Now, nearly at the end, faster than I thought, but this is going to be some shameless self-promotion, because I was doing only recently in the lockdown a very detailed case study of Friends of the Camac, and it was a very beneficial process, and I was in touch with them, and they gave us this feedback and a testimonial. This is a few lines from it. So apart from just a blatant shameless plug for ourselves, it is to give an idea of the uniqueness of LAWPRO as an organisation in the setup and flexibility of the role that I can absolutely attest to over the last 9 months, that where other roles, in fairness to those other roles, start and finish at a point. It's not that the community water officer role doesn't finish, but it's so intertwined, and the very nature of it is so flexible that we can offer a lot to the group. And I think that's reflected in some of the statements here by Friends of the Camac. And hopefully we can continue to work with groups and get good results. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening, and I hope it's been informative about LAWPRO and my role.
Super. Oh, great job, Thomas, and timing, of course, was fantastic, but a really lovely whistle-stop tour of what you're doing. So thank you so much for that. And congratulations on the success and that lovely case study that you talked about. So So I have been typing in some questions, and none of our colleagues have been busy typing in questions, but I'm going to start with a couple of the questions that came to mind as you were talking, if you don't mind. And please, guys, feel free to put in a few questions for Thomas. When you have him here now, might as well take advantage to get all the information. So one of my questions, Thomas, if you'll allow me, is does, in relation to the RBD, the River Basin Management Plan up to 21, and then the planned one following on from that, does the management plan have a parallel financial plan to support the objectives typically?
That's a good question, Fiona, and complex. My understanding is it does. The funding is put in place, and you'll see those high-level points that I mentioned in that slide, and that's taken into account in the River Basin Management Plan. But that's where my knowledge of that finishes, Fiona, because as you know, these are high-level governmental decisions, and everything funding related is subject to change. But that would be my understanding. Even in the points that I mentioned there on the slide, you can see that a certain amount is allocated for example, the ASAP program. If people are aware of what that is, the ASAP program is agricultural sustainability something program, which is essentially the catchment scientists that are on the ground, if they identify an issue and they think it's ag related, they can refer this to these ASAP advisors, which was a new part of the second River Basin Management Plan. And those advisors will visit, it's voluntary, they will visit a number of farms in the area where it has been identified that there's an issue with nutrients, for example, and they will give management advice, or it's all voluntary, and this is why it's been tried out, whereas previously it would have been punitive, from local authorities, but this way it's a voluntary approach by these ASAP advisors. So you'll see, Fiona, there is money earmarked, outlined for that in the plan. So that's my understanding. I hope that answers the question there.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. Just a second point from me. The questions are coming in now, so I won't delay with my own, but you had a really interesting point in relation to governance of groups and supporting the groups. So how is it done? Do you kind of do you provide a training in relation to governance?
That's a good question, Fiona. And as I said, I cannot understate how important that is becoming. Before Christmas, we had a meeting in Athlone about river trusts, the river trust model. And again, I'm not plugging that because it's relatively new in Ireland. And even the guy, Mark Horton, who is over river trusts in Ireland, he's to do with the Ballinderry River Trust up north. He was the first to say that the river trust model, is not sacrosanct. That's not what, and he works for, his job is to roll them out. It's just some sort of model where governance is to the fore. Yeah. So how do we do that? We're in the point of trying to establish how we do that, Fiona. But basically, we have seen that in order to create a rivers trust, for example, now one of the newest ones is the East Wicklow Rivers Trust. They all start off for different reasons, a different motivation. The Inishowen Rivers Trust in Donegal, that was started. Their motivating factor was flooding, which was a pertinent issue up there. The East Wicklow Rivers Trust, abstraction from the Vartry was their big concern, and then they got more groups. But in that seminar on Rivers Trust, it was just kept coming up, the idea of how all-consuming a Rivers Trust is for these part-time people. So if we take it down to a community group, what I've seen from friends at the CMAC is it's exactly the same.
Right.
As they're a community group based in Clondalkin, and the quality of the newsletter is outstanding, but also the work that's involved. So currently I was talking to the secretary there, Maria, who's responsible for that lovely feedback testimonial, and she was saying that, it's so hard. So the concern is that she goes and that sort of really tight work will fall apart. So I don't have an answer to that. We're trying to come up with a way of doing that, because we've identified that that's really important.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ruth has asked, have you found a growing interest in such groups and the setup of groups over the past year?
Interest in these types of groups. We're always bombarded. Like recently in Chapel Lizard there in the city centre, I had individuals contacting me. There's too much interest. That sounds like an odd thing to say, but for my own role, I know there could be 3 of me.
Well, that's
yeah, it is positive. Yeah, so like I said again, the Clondalkin one, our friends at the Camac were absolutely started as an offshoot of Clondalkin Tidy Towns. So they're completely focused as a waters group, which is great. There's another one I'm aware of in Ashburn on the Broadmeadow River. They have an absolute focused Broadmeadow action group. They're not all like that. They might just be an extension of the Tidy Towns group. But it really says something when you have these groups that their entire focus is on the river. And it shows how much work can be done on, it doesn't have to be a river, on the local lake or whatever water body that is. So yes, there's plenty of interest, Ruth. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I have questions flying in here now. So I'm going to kind of give you 3 questions at once and you have 5 minutes to answer them.
I will. If Fiona, if there's other questions that people really want answered, it's no problem. I can email afterwards and you can send it on.
Yeah, no, super. This is great. So Barbara Fogarty has asked, how was the group continuum model developed? Could it be applied across other areas to support the development of self-sustaining community initiatives? So that's just to have a think. Good there.
Question. So there's no enigma. That was just in-house, worked out, trying to drill down. You know, how do we in LAWPRO define what progress? You know, what's a progressed group as such. So actually, that example I showed you there is currently being tweaked, and so it's just an in-house thing from the last 3 years. What we would define as a progressed group.
Okay,
and that's how it was done.
I'm going to go on to another question by Greg McNamara. Is there a direct line of communication between LAWPRO and any representatives of water quality pressure sectors, agriculture, forestry, and would this be useful? That's a great question.
Yeah, there is. For example, I mentioned the ASAP advisors. So you know, there's that's obviously ag, but also today, as we speak, there is a regional management committee meeting going on, and that's between all agencies right now as we speak. So that's all directors of services in local authorities, and that happens quarterly. So so the connection is very close. Really, so that connection is there. But I think, to give the easy answer, I think these things can always be developed further and worked on. And those relationships, I think, and this could be applied across the board, are being developed. And I think what I realized in my first few weeks and months in LAWPRO, I only started in August, September last year, was that some people had embraced LAWPRO as an organization, realized how it was mutually beneficial. Others maybe were slower, and it was this new idea, which is totally understandable too. You know, what is this entity and where do they fit in? And that is still being worked out. So it's the idea of where does LAWPRO, especially it's nearly easier for community water officers. It is easier because ours is distinct. Where for the catchment scientists, there is an ongoing discussion about where their work starts and stops and overlaps with scientists from local authorities.
Oh yes.
So I hope that answers
that. From Matthew Jacobs. Have you been able to measure how effective different groups or organisations are at improving water quality? And are there some types of community projects that are more effective at improving local water quality in terms of achieving WFD goals? It's a great question. And you only have 2 minutes because I want to be able to say thanks at the end.
Great question. That's fundamental to our work. And it's a lot easier for the catchment scientists to monitor what work they're doing. For community water officers, it's the ongoing question. And that was actually part of why I was doing that huge case study, because we're trying to come up with parameters where we can gauge the effectiveness of work of community groups. Suffice to say that the kind of work you've done, Fiona, citizen science, is something that we're really going to see as being an important way to gauge that progress and effectiveness in terms of WFD.
Okay, great. You have outdone yourself there because you have well, less than a minute left, but some great questions there, and I know there was an eagerness, I think, for kind of longer discussion. So we're sorry to cut it short. Thomas.
No problem at all, Fiona, and I can answer questions if there's anything someone really wants answered by email. That's fine. You know.
Brilliant, yeah, and we'll send you on the questions that we've just been talking about. But I just want to finish by saying a huge thank you. It isn't easy to do these online kind of cafes, but it was again a huge success. You know, great interest. We had 23 participants from, you know, a variety of different areas and interests. So absolutely delighted, and just want to thank you, and we hope to have continued engagement with you, Thomas, over the coming months and years. So best of luck and stay safe, and same to everybody. Thank you all for engaging in this water cafe, and go and have your coffee now if you wish, and hopefully
thank you very much, Fiona.
We'll see you at the next one now next month. Okay, so stay safe and wash your hands. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.